1954, Royal Small Arms Factory, Enfield. British Army officers gathered to receive their new standard rifle. What they saw confused them. This was not the revolutionary bullpup design their own engineers had created. This was not the British weapon that had performed so strongly in domestic trials. This was a Belgian rifle chambered in an American cartridge that Britain had spent 5 years arguing against. The officers picked it up. It was heavy. It was long. It was, by the standards of what Britain had been developing, ugly. Within 3 decades, over 90 nations would adopt variants of this rifle. It would earn the nickname the right arm of the free world. British soldiers would carry it through Malaya, Borneo, Aden, Northern Ireland, and the Falkland Islands. And when the Ministry of Defence finally replaced it with a homegrown design, that replacement would fail so catastrophically that veterans would spend the next 40 years asking why Britain ever gave up the SLR. This is the story of a rifle nobody wanted that became the weapon everybody trusted. The L1A1 Self-Loading Rifle was Britain's adaptation of the Belgian FNFAL, standing for Fusil Automatique Léger, meaning light automatic rifle. The British version weighed 4.34 kilograms unloaded, rising to approximately 5 kilograms, with a full 20-round magazine. Overall length reached 1,090 millimeters, with a 533mm barrel. The rifle fired 7.62 by 51mm NATO ammunition at a muzzle velocity of 823 meters per second, roughly 2,700 feet per second in Imperial terms. Effective range for a trained marksman extended to 600 meters, though most combat engagements occurred at 300 meters or less. The operating system used a short-stroke gas piston with an adjustable gas regulator, one of the design's most significant tactical advantages. When the rifle fired, gas bled through a port in the forward gas block, integral with the front sight assembly. This gas drove a short-stroke piston that tapped the bolt carrier, giving it a brief impulse before the piston stopped and the bolt carrier continued moving under its own momentum. This short-stroke design reduced the mass of moving parts compared to long-stroke systems, improving accuracy and reducing felt recoil. The adjustable regulator allowed soldiers to increase or decrease gas flow, depending on conditions. In extreme cold, where lubricants thickened and fouling accumulated faster, soldiers could open the regulator to admit more gas. In dusty environments, they could close it slightly to reduce debris ingestion. The regulator could even be shut entirely for launching rifle grenades, allowing all propellant energy to drive the grenade rather than cycling the action. The heart of the locking mechanism was a tilting breech block. When the bolt was forward and locked, the rear of the bolt tilted downward into a recess in the receiver, creating a solid lockup that handled chamber pressures safely. As the bolt carrier moved rearward under gas pressure, a cam surface lifted the rear of the bolt, unlocking it from the receiver. The entire assembly then travelled rearward, extracting and ejecting the spent case. A recoil spring housed in the buttstock drove everything forward again, stripping a fresh round from the magazine and chambering it. The British deliberately removed the automatic fire capability present in the original Belgian design. Where the FNFAL could fire at approximately 650 rounds per minute on full automatic, the L1A1 was restricted to semi-automatic only. This was a doctrinal choice. British Army training emphasised aimed fire over volume. The official doctrine defined rapid fire as 20 aimed shots per minute, exactly 1 full magazine, with each round individually targeted. Understanding why Britain adopted a foreign rifle chambered in a foreign cartridge requires understanding the political compromise that preceded it. After World War II, British small arms designers recognised something American planners refused to accept. Most infantry combat occurred at ranges under 400 metres. The full-power rifle cartridges of the era, the .303 British and the American .306, generated excessive recoil for automatic fire, and were heavier than necessary for typical engagement distances. In 1945, the Ministry of Supply established the ideal caliber panel to determine optimal specifications for a new infantry cartridge. The panel recommended a bullet diameter between .276 and .280 inches. The resulting .280 British cartridge, also designated 7 by 43mm, produced approximately half the recoil of the .303, while maintaining comparable long-range performance. To fire this cartridge, designer Stefan Kenneth Janssen created the EM2, a compact bullpup rifle with an integrated optical sight. Overall length was just 889mm, a full 9.5 inches shorter than what would become the American M14. During trials at Warminster in 1951, the EM2 fired 84 aimed shots per minute in semi-automatic mode. The M1 Garand managed 43. The Lee-Enfield achieved 27. On April 25, 1951, The Labour government formally adopted the EM2 as Britain's new service rifle. Then politics intervened. The Americans, led by Colonel René Studler, Chief of Small Arms Research and Development, insisted NATO standardise on a .30 caliber cartridge matching .306 ballistics. According to contemporary accounts, Studler called any non-American design a waste of time. When the Fort Benning Trials Board recommended development in British .280 caliber in October 1950, senior US officers overruled the finding. Winston Churchill returned as Prime Minister in October 1951. According to records from War on the Rocks, Churchill personally test-fired both the EM2 and the American T-25 at Chequers. He found the American rifle's recoil so unpleasant he reportedly exclaimed that he did not wish to fire the damn thing anymore. Yet Churchill prioritised NATO unity over technical merit. He rescinded the EM2 adoption, believing a tacit agreement existed. Britain accepts the American cartridge. America accepts the FNFAL as NATO's standard rifle. America reneged after Britain, Canada, and dozens of other nations committed to 7.62 NATO and adopted FAL variants. The United States chose its own M14 instead. The T-48 trials, in which the FAL competed against the M14 prototype, were marred by allegations of rigging. During Arctic trials in December 1953, Springfield Armory engineers spent weeks preparing their rifles for cold weather performance. The competing FAL rifles received no such preparation. The predictable result: the M14 was declared decidedly superior in cold conditions. Britain had sacrificed its own superior design for the promise of Allied standardization. America then refused to standardize. The supreme irony arrived within a decade. The M14 proved difficult to control in full automatic fire during Vietnam. A large proportion were restricted to semi-automatic use in the field. The rifle was replaced by the M16 firing 5.56mm NATO after serving as America's standard rifle for barely 7 years. The L1A1 entered British service around 1954 and saw action in the latter stages of the Malayan emergency. Communist insurgents reportedly called it the rifle that shoots through trees, a reference to the 7.62 rounds penetration through jungle vegetation. During the Borneo confrontation from 1962 to 1966, the rifle proved reliable in humid tropical conditions, though its length was noted as unwieldy in dense jungle. Northern Ireland became the SLR's longest sustained combat deployment. It served as the primary infantry weapon throughout the most intense years of the Troubles. Cledwyn Jones of the Royal Welch Fusiliers, who completed 3 tours, stated that the SLR was a weapon that was tried and tested, and it had the stopping power, adding that it did not matter if the bad guy was hiding behind a wall, because the bullet went straight through it. The Falklands War in 1982 delivered the rifle's definitive test. Both sides carried variants of the same weapon. British troops used semi-automatic L1A1s, while Argentine soldiers carried select-fire FALs, manufactured under license. At the Battle of Goose Green, 2 Para's 690 men attacked approximately 1,100 Argentine defenders across open terrain, where the SLR's long-range accuracy proved advantageous. Some British soldiers fitted 30-round Bren gun magazines to increase capacity. Captured Argentine FALs were pressed into service for their automatic fire capability. On Mount Longdon, 3 Para fought one of the war's bloodiest engagements, suffering 23 killed and over 80 wounded in a night assault against fortified positions. Platoon Sergeant Ian Mackay earned a posthumous Victoria Cross after charging an Argentine machine gun position with his SLR, hurling grenades to neutralise it before being killed. On Mount Harriet, Corporal Stephen Newland of the Royal Marines, separated from his unit, single-handedly engaged an entire Argentine squad, throwing grenades into their position, before emptying his 20-round magazine into survivors. At Tumbledown, troops from 148 Battery, who had been issued M16s, complained about the killing ability of the 5.56 round. Some picked up Argentine FALs instead. The rifle performed reliably throughout the cold, wet, boggy South Atlantic conditions. British troops could use captured Argentine ammunition, and Argentine metric magazines could be used loosely in British inch-pattern receivers. The reverse was not possible, giving the British a logistical advantage. Now, if you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Against the American M14, the weapons shared identical caliber but diverged sharply in reliability. The M14's long-stroke gas piston lacked the FAL's adjustable regulator. Its wooden stock swelled in Vietnam's humidity. Its open action ingested dirt. Australian soldiers in Vietnam explicitly preferred the L1A1 over the M16. finding it more reliable with greater stopping power. The M14 served barely 7 years as America's standard rifle. The L1A1 served 40. Against the German G3, the comparison was more nuanced. The G3 used a roller-delayed blowback system with no gas system at all, making it less sensitive to fouling, but it paid for this with harsh, violent recoil. Ejected cases flew 20 to 30 feet with such force they were often dented. Field stripping was fiddlier than the FAL's elegant hinge-open design. West Germany adopted the G3 not because it was superior, but because FN refused to license the FAL to Germany. Belgium had endured 2 devastating German occupations. During World War II, FN's factory had been seized, its directors arrested, its assembly lines run by slave labour. Against the Soviet AK-47, the comparison was philosophical. The L1A1 was a precision semi-automatic tool for trained marksmen, engaging targets to 600 metres. The AK was a robust automatic weapon for conscript armies, fighting at 300 metres or less. The 7.62 NATO round delivered roughly 70% more muzzle energy than the Soviet 7.62x39. The conversion from metric FNFAL to Imperial L1A1 went far deeper than changing measurement systems. The entire rifle was redrawn using British Imperial dimensions, creating what collectors call the inch pattern FAL. Critical British improvements included sand cuts, zigzag grooves machined into the bolt carrier and receiver, that provided clearance for sand and grit without jamming the action. The folding cocking handle was developed specifically for British arms drill. A folding trigger guard allowed use with Arctic mittens. The chrome-lined barrel enhanced corrosion resistance. British engineers also deleted the automatic hold-open device present on Belgian FALs, reducing potential points of dirt ingress. Parts interchangeability between inch and metric patterns became one of the rifle's great myths. Many sub-assemblies could cross between patterns, but individual components frequently could not. Magazines were the most notorious incompatibility. The L1A1's magazine well used a wide rectangular cutout, while the metric FAL used a half-circular one. Muzzle devices, barrel fittings, and magazine geometry were often incompatible between inch and metric patterns. Bayonets, stocks, and fire control parts were not interchangeable. During the Falklands conflict, British troops could use captured Argentine ammunition, but could not reliably swap magazines between the two types. According to documentation from the Lithgow Small Arms Factory Museum, Australian production required 20,000 drawings, 25,000 pieces of tooling, and 1,300 machining operations per rifle. Total worldwide production of FAL variants reached an estimated 3 to 5 million rifles across more than 15 countries manufacturing under license. Perhaps the most colourful legend involves the bitch. According to veteran accounts, Australian SAS troops in Vietnam Field modified their L1A1s by chopping the barrel immediately in front of the gas block, filing down selector switches to enable full automatic fire, fitting 30-round L2A1 magazines, and sometimes mounting American XM148 grenade launchers. The resulting weapon was nicknamed the bitch because the bolt's motion and the barrel's lightweight made it impossible to hold on target. The purpose was pure shock effect. When a small SAS patrol was compromised, they would open fire full automatic, empty a magazine, and break contact while the enemy believed they had hit a much larger force. No surviving examples are known. The modifications were completely unauthorized, and the rifles apparently passed from unit to relieving unit, never leaving Vietnam. Whether entirely true or not, the story persists among veterans. The L1A1 served British forces for approximately 40 years. Its replacement, the L85A1C80, became one of the most notorious procurement disasters in British military history. Magazine release catches lacked guards, causing magazines to fall out when bumped. The weapon was designed exclusively for right-handed shooters, meaning it could not be fired from the left shoulder. In Northern Ireland, where soldiers needed to switch shoulders constantly when clearing rooms and moving around corners, this was a critical flaw. Plastic components froze, melted, or broke depending on climate. In Sierra Leone, safety plungers made from cheap injection, molded plastic swelled when wet, potentially rendering weapons completely inoperative. Bayonets reportedly flew off when fired. According to Forces News, soldiers dubbed it the civil servant, because it did not work and could not be fired. British Army armourers who had maintained SLRs found the transition maddening. One armourer recalled that in the armoury the SLR was simple to service. Quick oil, run a bore gauge through it, check firing pin protrusion, work the action, and back in the rack. When they got the L85s, nearly every week they were modifying the things. The SAS trialled the SA80 and rejected it outright. SAS Sergeant Chris Ryan called them poor quality, unreliable weapons at the best of times, prone to stoppages. It took Heckler & Koch's comprehensive rebuild as the L85A2 in the early 2000s to produce a functional weapon. Brian Sherrington, who carried the SLR in the Falklands and the SA-80 in the Gulf War, captured the consensus. He stated that clearly the shorter and lighter SA-80 appealed for obvious reasons, but in terms of actually firing the weapon, its effective range and the devastating power it had, the SLR has to be his ultimate weapon. The FNFAL family remains in service across dozens of countries. Brazil's IMBEL still produces variants. The Royal New Zealand Navy still uses the L1A1 for line throwing between ships, one of its last operational roles. In the United States collector market, genuine British-made L1A1 receivers command prices approaching $4,000 in unfired condition. The final irony arrived in 2022. The United States Army selected a 6.8mm cartridge for its next-generation squad weapon, a caliber remarkably close to the .280 British concept that Britain had been forced to abandon in 1951. The L1A1 was the right rifle, in the wrong caliber, adopted for the wrong reasons. It was designed by Belgians, chambered in an American cartridge that Britain never wanted, manufactured in Imperial measurements from metric drawings, and forced upon soldiers who had spent careers mastering the Lee-Enfield bolt action. It was heavier, uglier, and more mechanically complex than what it replaced. Nobody asked for it, and yet, through jungle, desert, Arctic bog, and urban streets, through Malaya, Borneo, Aden, Belfast, and the freezing hills of the Falkland Islands, the L1A1 never let its soldiers down. Its adjustable gas system adapted to conditions other rifles choked in. Its 7.62 round punched through walls, trees, and body armor that smaller calibers could not defeat. Its robust construction survived neglect, abuse, and mud. 40 years and 6 major conflicts produced a verdict no procurement committee could have predicted. Soldiers loved it.